Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is set to launch soon, and being the successor to the long-dormant, fan-favorite Budokai Tenkaichi series, the upcoming arena fighter is obviously a game that no few people are extremely excited about. We certainly count ourselves in that group as well, so here we're going to fan the flames of our Dragon Ball excitement by listing the top 15 games that the series has delivered to date. Given just how many Dragon Ball games there have been over the years, it goes without saying that this list is by no means going to be a comprehensive one, so if we miss out on any of your favorites, make sure to let us know. But, you know, calmly. Dragon Ball Z Raging Blast 2. Memories of the Raging Blast games often go hand in hand with the very strong feeling that they never quite matched up to the Budokai Tenkaichi games, but viewed on their own, they had their fair share of strengths. Raging Blast 2 in particular had plenty to like, from its strong roster of playable fighters to the explosive fighting mechanics it touted. Frustrating camera controls and the lack of a story mode were certainly major issues, but the game was not without its redeeming qualities. Dragon Ball Origins. Let's switch gears to a very different flavor of Dragon Ball games. Released for the DS in 2008, Dragon Ball Origins was a surprisingly fun action-adventure romp, and one that probably doesn't get the credit that it deserves. On top of being narratively compelling and boasting pleasant visuals, Origins also featured undeniably enjoyable core mechanics that were heavily inspired by The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass's touchscreen-focused controls. Super Dragon Ball Z. Super Dragon Ball Z is easily one of the more underrated games in this list. The 3D fighter launched for PS2 in 2006, and though some might say that the Budokai Tenkaichi series sort of stole its lunch, more on those games in a bit, Super was a solid fighter in its own right. Top-notch visuals, destructible environments, highly technical fighting mechanics, and more came together in an inarguably solid fighter. Dragon Ball Z Burst Limit. Burst Limit critics often bring up the game's sparse roster, especially compared to the Budokai Tenkaichi games. And while there's merit to that criticism, there's no denying that the game had plenty of strengths to make up for that weakness. From being mechanically tight and satisfying, to touting gorgeous visuals, to boasting a genuinely engaging story mode. For Dragon Ball fans, there was a lot to love about Burst Limit. Dragon Ball Z Legacy of Goku. There have been quite a few notable Dragon Ball RPGs over the years, but for many, nothing will ever beat the Legacy of Goku trilogy. Telling some of the earliest and most iconic Dragon Ball stories, and focusing entirely on Goku as a playable character, there was an undeniable appeal to its premise. While with its real-time action combat, it delivered gameplay that was straightforward yet consistently fun. Dragon Ball Z Legendary Super Warriors. Being a decidedly old Game Boy Color game, Dragon Ball Z Legendary Super Warriors understandably doesn't get brought up in conversations about the best Dragon Ball games too often, but those who have played it will gladly tell you how fun it was. As a turn-based card battler, it was, for starters, just a very unique kind of Dragon Ball experience. While viewed on its own merits, it also touted surprising depth and complexity. From how it encouraged replay value to the many different cards that it featured, Legendary Super Warriors had more to it than you may expect at first glance. Dragon Ball Z Attack of the Saiyans. Amidst a sea of fighters that admittedly come in many different flavors, Dragon Ball games have often found success in other genres as well, and the DS Attack of the Saiyans is one of the finest examples of that. The turn-based RPG is a nostalgic romp for multiple reasons, from its gameplay to its visuals. While on the narrative front, by focusing almost exclusively on the Saiyan saga, it feels like a relatively more focused experience, while still offering bucket loads of content. Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 2. For many, the Budokai Tenkaichi series is the ultimate kind of Dragon Ball games, and Budokai Tenkaichi 2 cemented that notion for many. The series' sophomore outing was chock full of playable fighters and incredible what-if scenarios, while touting legitimately excellent fighting game mechanics that could enable players to recreate the bombastic, explosive fights that Dragon Ball has always been known for. For diehard fans of the property, this game was unmissable. Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3. Not to be confused with Budokai Tenkaichi 3, and more on that in a bit, Budokai 3 was an earlier fighter released by the same developer, Dimps, and a solid fighter in its own right. Building on the tried and true fighting mechanics of its predecessor, the game touted some of the best and most mechanically satisfying action in a Dragon Ball game at the time, with its transformations and customization drawing quite a bit of praise among other things. Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. One of the more recent entries in this feature, but one that has definitely earned its place. Dragon Ball Z Kakarot's moment-to-moment gameplay offerings might feel a bit bland on the surface, but for Dragon Ball fans, the game feels like a dream come true. Overflowing with content, perfectly capturing the Dragon Ball aesthetic, featuring a vast roster of playable characters, and having been supported incredibly well by Bandai Namco since its launch in 2020. Kakarot is an accomplished action RPG that Dragon Ball fans cannot afford to miss. Dragon Ball Z Buu's Fury. Speaking of Dragon Ball RPGs that fans shouldn't miss, the conclusion to the Legacy of Goku's trilogy was another excellent outing for the series. Though arguably not as good as its immediate predecessor, Buu's Fury had plenty going for it nonetheless, with a variety of playable characters, the introduction of fusions, and continued improvements on the combat and RPG systems, not to mention a banging soundtrack. As we mentioned, however, it wasn't quite on the same level as its predecessor. Dragon Ball Z Legacy of Goku 2. The Legacy of Goku trilogy was at its very best with its middle chapter. Building on the first installment, Legacy of Goku 2 expanded on its gameplay by letting players play as multiple different characters, and just as crucially, adding transformations. Combined with a number of other smaller, mechanical, iterative improvements, Legacy of Goku 2 delivered a compelling action RPG experience that still stands as one of the best Dragon Ball games we've ever played. Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3. Comparing most other Dragon Ball games to Budokai Tenkaichi 3 feels almost a bit unfair, because of just how spectacularly fleshed out the arena fighter was in almost everything that it did. A meaty story mode, explosive fighting mechanics, online multiplayer, and customization improvements, and so much more. All of which was propped up by an overwhelming roster of over 160 playable characters. For many, Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3 still stands as the series' brightest ever spot, and it's hard not to see where they're coming from. Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2. When it launched back in 2016, Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 was a legitimately fun action RPG experience in its own right, and likely would have earned itself a place on this list as it was. What has really driven it to being so close to the very top, however, is the stellar post-launch support that it's received over the years. Not only has it received well over a dozen DLC packs over the years, close to a decade on from release, the game still continues to get completely new expansions. Xenoverse 2 is the gift that keeps on giving, and easily one of the best Dragon Ball games to date. Dragon Ball FighterZ. When ranking Dragon Ball games, it's hard to look past Arc System Works' incredible 2018 Fighter, which may even be one of the best fighting games in recent memory, if not even of all time. Where do you even begin with this one? Gorgeous visuals, some of the tightest and most satisfying mechanics we've seen in a fighter, the incredibly well-balanced competitive scene, how surprisingly good the story mode was, not to mention how excellent of an addition the brand new character Android 21 turned out to be. The list of things to love in Dragon Ball FighterZ is a long one. And that'll be about it for this one. If you guys like what we're doing at GamingBolt, please consider subscribing to our channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.